Tonight, beneath a curtain of gentle rain, we open the doors to a library older than memory, the University of Coimbra Library, where bats, not books, guard the wisdom of centuries. Welcome, dear listener. You're with Evelyn Blackwood, and this is the Library Bats of Coimbra, a rainy night sleep story, a gentle tale to drift into dreams. So before we begin, take a slow breath in and exhale softly. Feel the weight of the day melt away. Let your shoulders sink deeper into the pillow, your mind uncoil from its endless loops. The sound of rain outside your window will be our rhythm tonight, and my voice will be the lantern leading you quietly through the dark corridors of thought. You are safe here. Only the soft hum of rain, the whisper of pages, and the flutter of wings in the candlelight. In the heart of Portugal, perched upon a hill overlooking the river Mondego, the ancient Library of Coimbra has stood for nearly 300 years. By day, scholars wander its halls, their whispers echoing against gilded ceilings and shelves that rise like wooden cathedrals. But by night, when the candles are snuffed and the doors creak shut, another set of guardians awakens, hundreds of tiny bats that take flight from behind the carvings and rafters. For centuries, they have protected the books from moths and dust, their silent wings keeping the collection safe. Locals say that if you listen closely on a rainy night, you can hear the rustle of wings and the sigh of stories long forgotten. It was on such a night that a young historian named Clara arrived at the university. She came to study a lost manuscript rumored to contain letters from a monk who had gone mad within these very walls. The rain clung to her coat as she crossed the courtyard, her boots echoing against the cobblestones slick with autumn mist. Inside, the air was perfumed with parchment and candle smoke. The librarian, an elderly man named Senor Duarte, greeted her with a weary smile. "You must be here for the nocturnal permit," he said. "Few ask for it these days." Clara nodded, her curiosity glowing brighter than the lantern in her hand. "I heard the bats only fly after midnight," she whispered. The old man's smile faded slightly. "Yes," he said softly, "and sometimes they are not alone." As midnight deepened, Clara found herself in the manuscript chamber, a place lined with books, so old that the leather bindings had cracked into delicate maps of time. The rain tapped at the tall windows like fingers of a forgotten friend. She placed her lantern on the table, its golden light flickering across a manuscript bound in dark red velvet. The letters inside were uneven, almost trembling, written by a monk named Thomas in the year 1727. "They told me to write only truth," one passage began, "but the truth is a door that once opened cannot be closed." Outside, a flutter, faint at first, then louder. Dozens of bats swirled through the air, their tiny bodies tracing arcs of shadow across the ceiling. Clara smiled, fascinated. But then, beneath their fluttering, she heard something else. A low hum, like a voice murmuring beneath the rain. It came from behind one of the tall shelves. Slowly, she rose, lantern trembling in her hand. "Is someone there?" she whispered. The answer was a breath, soft, almost human, but not quite. When she turned the corner, the light revealed a faint outline on the wall, words burned into the wood itself. They were in Latin, but one phrase she could make out clearly: non dormien libri, nec silent umbri. Books do not sleep, nor do shadows stay silent. The room grew colder, the air thick with the scent of old paper and rain-soaked stone. She could feel the pulse of history itself, alive, watching, waiting. Somewhere high above, a single bat swooped low, landing on the edge of the manuscript as if guarding it. Its tiny eyes glimmered in the lantern light. Clara whispered to herself, "Maybe legends breathe for a reason." The rain fell harder, blurring the world beyond the window into streaks of silver. The old library seemed to hum with life, the walls breathing, the shadows shifting, the whispers of the past murmuring just beyond hearing. Tonight, in this ancient room, time had folded, and as Clara closed her eyes for a moment, she could almost hear the voice of the monk Thomas himself, or perhaps it was only the rain speaking through the centuries. The rain had deepened into a steady rhythm against the windows, a slow, patient tapping that seemed to speak in syllables Clara couldn't quite understand. She leaned closer to the manuscript, her breath soft and even, the golden flame of the lantern trembling as if it too were listening. The ink upon the parchment glistened faintly in the dim light, and between the lines of the monk's desperate words, a faint watermark, appeared an image of a winged creature, etched long before the paper was ever written upon. She brushed her fingertips across it gently, tracing the outline of its wings. "A bat," she whispered to herself, realizing with a quiet chill that it was the same symbol carved above the great doorway of the library. The sound of fluttering echoed from somewhere high above, and when she looked up, dozens of small, dark bodies circled the chandelier, their wings whispering through the dust-filled air. She felt no fear, only awe. The bats were graceful, like living shadows, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were forming patterns, almost words, in their flight. The manuscript crackled softly as she turned another page. The next entry in Thomas's journal was written in uneven strokes, as though his hand had been trembling when he wrote, "The rain does not stop. It falls, even within my dreams." The bats whisper secrets from the rafters, and their eyes glow when I write. They tell me things that are not meant for men to know. Clara read those words aloud, her voice merging with the hush of the rain. She paused, listening. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the faintest echo, a whisper that seemed to repeat her words from the dark, just behind her shoulder. She turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the rows of ancient books, their spines glinting gold, and the flutter of wings. Above, slowly, she returned to the table, her heart still beating in rhythm with the rain. "Senhor." Duarte had told her earlier that no one stayed in the library past 1 o'clock. It was already midnight. She should have left, but curiosity wrapped around her like the warm fog outside the window, impossible to escape. Clara dipped her quill in the ink and began to copy one of the monk's passages into her notebook. As the tip of her quill touched the paper, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, though the windows were closed. The lantern flickered, and the bats swooped lower, almost in warning. The light dimmed, then steadied again, and for a heartbeat, Clara thought she saw someone standing across the room, a tall figure in the robe of an old Benedictine monk. His face was pale, aged, sadoched. When she blinked, he was gone. Only the manuscript remained open before her, its ink still glistening wet as though freshly written. She whispered the monk's name, Thomas, and the sound seemed to echo back from the walls in 100 soft voices. She could feel the pulse of the library now, alive and ancient. The wooden beams creaked softly, and the scent of old wax and rainwater filled her senses. Every sound was amplified. The ticking of a distant clock, the shuffle of wings, the faint drip of water down the stone walls. Clara sat still, feeling the weight of centuries pressing gently around her. When she looked again at the manuscript, new words had appeared, faint but legible. The guardians do not sleep. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the lantern, holding it closer. Beneath those words, the ink shimmered faintly like dew. She whispered, "Who are the guardians?" The silence that followed was so deep it seemed to stretch beyond time itself. Then came a sound, not from the bats this time, but from the shelves. A soft sliding noise, as if one of the massive bookcases had shifted on its own. Dust drifted from above, and Clara's lantern caught the faint outline of a doorway behind the books. It was small, carved into the stone, its edges worn smooth by centuries of secrets. She hesitated. The whispering had stopped. Even the bats were still now, hanging motionless like velvet ornaments. The rain became the only voice left, steady, eternal. Slowly, she pushed her lantern closer to the hidden door. A breeze escaped from the gap, warm, smelling faintly of incense and something else. Iron, perhaps, or blood. Her heart thudded softly in her chest. She thought of the monk Thomas, riding alone in this very place, hearing voices that no one else could hear. Was this the door he meant? The door that should never be opened. Her hand hovered over the stone handle. The lantern's flame trembled, as though warning her, but curiosity, ever stronger than caution, urged her onward. She took a slow breath and whispered, "For knowledge." Then, with a soft click, she turned the handle. The darkness that spilled from the opening was unlike any she had ever seen. Not empty, but full, like ink spreading through water. It seemed to breathe to softly, and within it something shifted, a shape, faint and distant. But watching her, the air behind the bookshelf was thick and warm, unlike the cool, damp atmosphere of the library. Clara hesitated at the threshold, holding her lantern before her, as the golden light pushed gently against the darkness. The rain outside had softened into a delicate murmur, like distant applause. Dust swirled lazily in the light, and for a moment she felt as though she had stepped into a dream someone else had long forgotten. The room was narrow, perhaps a monk's study once lined with shelves carved directly into the stone. But unlike the main library, these shelves held no books, only relics, small wooden boxers, faded scrolls, and pieces of parchment bound with crimson ribbons. Clara's footsteps echoed softly on the worn stone floor. Her heart was still unsteady from the shock of discovering the hidden passage, yet curiosity tugged her forward like a thread. She brushed her fingers along the nearest wall and felt the cold moisture clinging to the stone. The scent of old wax and rain filled the air. On a table at the far end of the room lay a single object, a large, leather-bound tome with a lock of tarnished silver. Beneath it, something moved, not an insect, nor a rat. The motion was slower, rhythmic, as though the book itself were breathing. Clara approached, her breath quiet, her pulse echoing in her ears. When she touched the cover, the air seemed to change. The rain grew louder for an instant, and then silence. Absolute silence. The library above had vanished into stillness. The bats no longer fluttered, the wind no longer sighed. Even her own heartbeat felt distant. She tried to lift the book, but the lock resisted. Engraved upon it was a sigil, the same bat-shaped symbol she'd seen in Tomas's manuscript. Its eyes, tiny gems of obsidian, glinted in the flickering lantern light. She leaned closer, tracing the symbol, and whispered, "Tomas!" A whisper answered her, soft, trembling, ancient. He wrote what should not be read. The voice was neither male nor female, but layered, like dozens of whispers speaking in unison. Clara Frosi. The sound didn't come from any direction. It was everywhere, vibrating gently in the air around her. She looked behind her, but the passage was gone. Only a smooth wall of stone remained, as though the bookshelf had sealed itself shut. Panic flickered briefly in her chest, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. "Who are you?" she whispered into the dark. "We are the keepers of silence," the voice replied. "The guardians, Tomas, defied. The rain remembers. The ink remembers. So must you." Her lantern flickered again, dimming until the shadows thickened and the relics on the shelves seemed to lean closer. Curious, the tome trembled under her hand, and then, with a faint metallic sigh, the silver lock released itself. A thin ribbon of cold air escaped from within, carrying the faint scent of myrrh and old parchment. Clara hesitated only a moment before opening it. Inside were pages of script written in looping, elegant Latin. But what caught her breath was the final page, blank, except for a single line written in fresh, glistening ink. Every story is a binding. The ink shimmered faintly like rain on glass, and as she watched, droplets of moisture began to gather along the edges of the page, though there was no leak in the ceiling. The book was weeping. She reached out, touched the tear-shaped droplets, and the air rippled dot in a flash. She was no longer in the hidden chamber. She stood instead in a vast hall, a reflection of the library, yet older, grander, and eerily still. The chandeliers burned with blue fire. The air shimmered with the echo of wings. Around her, monks in shadowed robes wrote endlessly on invisible pages, their quills moving though there was no ink, no sound. When she turned, she saw the bats, hundreds of them, hanging upside down along the vaulted ceiling, their eyes reflecting the pale blue light. One by one, they lifted their heads and looked at her. The same voice returned, now clearer, closer. "Do you understand, Clara? The rain never ends, because memory never ends. You came to read, but you have been written." She wanted to speak, but no sound came. The monks had stopped writing, their heads turned toward her, faces pale and featureless, as if erased by time itself. Her lantern burned low. The flame leaned backward, as though drawn towards something behind her. Slowly, she turned, and there stood Tomas. He looked exactly as his portrait had shown. Kind eyes, worn robes, ink stains upon his fingers. Yet his expression was sorrowful, pleading. I tried to keep it sealed, sighed softly. His voice was faint, brittle like old paper, but the story always finds a reader. Clara reached out, but her hand passed through him like mist. He smiled, almost tenderly. Close the book before it writes you to. The light from her lantern flared, and the world folded back into the small chamber. The tome lay open before her, the ink on the page spreading slowly into new words. Her own name appeared there, Clara Mindis. The whisper came one last time, close to her ear, almost kind. Now you are part of the library. And 10. And 10. Only rain. Asterisk. The rain outside had become a steady rhythm again, soft, almost melodic, as though the sky itself were breathing with her. Clara stood motionless before the tome, her name still glistening in wet ink upon the parchment. For a long moment she could not move. The words shimmered faintly, the droplets spreading until the letters dissolved into a dark stain. Then the page turned itself, as if guided by an unseen hand. Another line appeared, written in slow, deliberate strokes. The reader must not awaken the echoes. Her heart thudded quietly, but her breath steadied. She closed the book gently, and the air shifted again. Lighter now, but filled with a low hum, like the vibration of distant wings. She looked around, half expecting Thomas to appear once more. Yet the chamber stood still. Only the sound of dripping water punctuated the silence. Clara lifted her lantern, its flame trembling, and noticed something new. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. The stones, damp and ancient, pulsed faintly, as though carrying a heartbeat deep beneath their surface. She stepped back toward where the passage had once been, pressing her palm to the stone. It was cool, but softer than it should have been. Beneath her touch, she could feel motion, faint ripples, like the slow inhale of something enormous sleeping behind the wall. The realization struck her with a chill. The library was alive. Not merely a building, but a living memory, feeding upon the words it protected. Thomas hadn't been guarding a secret. He had been guarding the thing that grew from secrets themselves. Clara pressed harder, whispering, "Let me out." The stone shivered under her hand. For a moment, it seemed to listen. Then, faintly, the shape of the bookshelf returned, not opening, but forming like mist coalescing into form. The shelves filled with phantom books, their spines flickering like candlelight. The titles were unreadable, their letters shifting and rearranging before her eyes. When she tried to focus, the letters melted away. She took a slow breath, remembering the voice's warning. The reader must not awaken the echoes, but the more she resisted, the louder they became. Whispers rising from the shelves, overlapping like soft rain on glass. Do not read aloud. Do not remember. Do not let the ink know your name. The voices overlapped until they became almost musical. Clara clutched the lantern close and took a step back, her boots scraping against the floor. That single sound silenced them all. In that silence, she heard another, the faint patter of tiny feet along the ceiling. She lifted her gaze. Bats. Dozens of them, perhaps more, peering down at her from the rafters that should not have existed in a room carved from stone. Their eyes glimmered like drops of night. They hung perfectly still, as if carved from shadow. Then one moved, a soft flutter, delicate, deliberate. It dropped from the ceiling, wings unfolding like black silk. It circled her once, twice, before landing gently upon the open tome. Its claws left faint imprints in the wet ink. Clara froze, every part of her aching to flee, but she couldn't. The bat tilted its head, regarding her as if it understood. Then it began to clean its wings, casual, calm, unbothered by her fear. "You're not afraid," she whispered to it. Its small body stilled. Then, without opening its mouth, she heard a voice, not aloud, but inside her mind. "Fear feeds the ink." Clara's breath caught. "What are you?" The last page. It replied simply. And before she could speak again, the walls shuddered. Books tumbled from the shelves, landing softly on the floor though none had touched them. Each opened by itself, releasing a sigh of old paper and dust. From within their pages, shapes began to crawl, shadows thin as smoke, rising like mist and forming into faint outlines of people. The air grew colder. Clara stepped back, her light dimming, her reflection warping in the brass of the lantern. The shadows whispered her name, over and over, 100 soft voices, overlapping like rainfall on stone. Clara Mendes, Clara Mendes. She turned and ran. But the hallway that awaited her was not the one she had entered. It twisted, narrow and endless, lined with shelves that bent and breathed. Every direction she turned looked the same. She ran her fingers along the walls, tracing symbols she couldn't recognize, her breath shallow and trembling. The rain outside, or what she thought was outside, now echoed inside her ears. The sound wasn't falling anymore. It was rising, flowing upward as if gravity itself had changed. Clara stopped. In front of her stood a mirror, framed in dark oak. She could see herself pale, trembling, eyes wide. But in the reflection, something was wrong. Behind her reflection, the bats hung like words written in ink across the ceiling. They began to move again, forming a shaped wings spreading wide. A silhouette of something vast, ancient, watching. The bat upon the tome fluttered once more, then whispered in her mind, "Every library has a keeper, and the keeper always wakes when a new story begins." Clara looked into her reflection's eyes. It smiled back, though she did not know. The lantern went out, and in the darkness, the sound of rain became a heartbeat. The darkness lingered like a breath held too long, heavy yet oddly soothing. Clara could still hear the heartbeat beneath the rain, steady and slow, as if the ancient library itself had fallen asleep again. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamed the entire thing: the living walls, the whispering shadows, the voice of the bat. But the silence wasn't empty. It was expectant, like the pause between two notes of a lullaby. She lifted her hand and realized the ink from the tome still stained her fingertips, glimmering faintly under the dim light that seeped from nowhere. When she stepped forward, the floor beneath her felt softer than stone, almost like the surface of a quiet pond. Each step rippled faintly, distorting her reflection below a reflection that didn't quite move as she did. The air was warmer here, filled with a scent of old parchment, cedarwood, and something faintly sweet, like candle smoke from a forgotten altar. The hush was almost sacred. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint flutter of wings and the murmur of pages turning themselves. Then, softly, Tomas's voice broke through the quiet. "You shouldn't have opened it, Clara." She froze. "You're still here." He stepped out from the shadows, lantern in hand, his face pale and weary. The edges of his figure wavered like smoke, not fully solid, yet not ghostly either. His eyes, though kind, carried centuries of sleeplessness. The book remembers names. Once it knows yours, you belong to its story. Clara swallowed hard, clutching her lantern though it offered no warmth. "I didn't mean to." "I know," he interrupted gently. "No one ever does." Set his lantern down, and its dim glow spread across the floor, revealing faint outlines of other figures' blurred silhouettes, like people caught halfway between being and memory. They stood motionless, their faces unreadable, as if watching her from another layer of time. "They were readers too," Tomas said quietly. "Dreamers, historians, those who sought to listen rather than sleep. The library gave them stories. It just never let them go." Her heart tightened. "And you," he smiled sadly. "I was the first to listen to the bats." From above, the fluttering began again, gentle, rhythmic, like 1,000 pieces of parchment rustling in the night breeze. Clara tilted her head upward. The bats were circling the dome of the library now, their wings glistening with faint traces of light, almost like raindrops caught in candle flame. One by one, they began to land upon the spines of the books, their small bodies blending seamlessly into the carvings. She realized, with quiet awe, that they weren't just creatures, they were the library's script. Every movement of their wings left traces of ink in the air, letters curling and fading like dreams. Tomas's voice soft, barely above a whisper. "Each one carries a story, a piece of a soul. When the rain comes, they wake to rewrite what time has forgotten." The thought was both haunting and beautiful. Clara took a step closer to the shelves, her fingers brushing one of the bats. Its body was warm, alive, and yet weightless. As she touched it, images bloomed behind her eyelids. A street in old Coimbra, under moonlight, a scholar writing by candlelight, a woman humming to her sleeping child while thunder rolled beyond the hills. Stories within stories, memories drifting like dust motes. When she opened her eyes, the bat had disappeared, and her fingers were stained with a new pattern of ink lines, forming a single word. "Listen." "Tomas?" she breathed. "What happens if I keep reading?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then you will stop dreaming your own life and begin dreaming the libraries." The rain outside grew heavier, or perhaps it was the sound of 1,000 pages turning at once. The scent of wet stone and ink thickened in the air. Clara's lantern flickered, its flame shrinking to a pinprick of gold. She turned toward Tomas, but his figure was already fading. "Where are you going?" "I am already gone," he whispered. "But you?" He hesitated, as though listening to something unseen. "You might still find a way out, if you follow the sound that isn't rain." Clara listened. Beneath the steady rhythm of droplets, there was another sound so faint she might have imagined it. A heartbeat. Yes, but softer now. Almost like breathing. And beneath that, a melody. A woman's voice humming. She took a cautious step forward, following the sound down a narrow corridor that seemed to unfold from the wall itself. The air shimmered as she walked through, like stepping through a dream. The hum grew louder, familiar, comforting, impossibly tender. It was the same tune she remembered from childhood, the one her mother used to hum when the rain fell against their windows. Clara's throat tightened. "Mother," she whispered. The hum paused. Then, gently, the voice replied, not from ahead, but from within her mind, the same way the bat had spoken. The library remembers those who remember it. Tears welled in her eyes. She stepped forward into the dim golden glow that seemed to rise from the floor. The shadows deepened, and she realized she was standing before another door, this one carved with words she could finally read. The archive of forgotten rain. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Behind her, the whispering of wings grew restless again, like 1,000 tiny hearts beating in time. She turned slightly, and through the veil of shadow saw Thomas one last time, his lantern now nothing but the faint echo of light inodid onse. Every story must be read to the end. The door opened by itself. A warm wind swept through, carrying the scent of night rain, ink, and memory. Clara stepped through, and the door closed silently behind her. Asterisk the moment Clara stepped through the door. The rain's rhythm changed. It no longer sounded like droplets striking the earth, but like gentle fingers brushing over parchment, each note soft, measured, deliberate. The air was thicker here, carrying a warmth that smelled of cedar wood and candle wax, tinged with a faint sweetness of something ancient, like ink that had dried centuries ago, but still remembered its purpose. Ahead of us stretched an immense circular chamber, glowing faintly with amber light. The walls were made not of stone, but of shelves, endless, spiraling shelves that curved upward into shadows so deep they dissolved into the ceiling. Each shelf was filled with jars instead of books, each jar holding what looked like folded pieces of paper, glowing faintly from within, as if each one contained a captured memory. A voice drifted through the still air, slow and kind. "You've walked far to hear the last story, haven't you?" Clara turned. Standing in the center of the chamber was a woman clothed in robes of pale gold. Her hair shimmered silver under the flickering light, and her eyes carried the same glow as the jars that surrounded them, a patient radiance that seemed neither mortal nor entirely ghostly. Clara recognized her instantly, not because she had ever seen her, but because her presence resonated like a lullaby she'd known since childhood. Asterisk, are you? Clara's voice trembled. The librarian. The woman smiled softly. Once, perhaps. Now, I'm only what remains when the stories stop being told. Clara took a hesitant step closer. The air shimmered faintly, like rain falling in slow motion. Why am I here? The librarian's gaze lowered to the ink that stained Clara's fingers. Because you listened when most only read. The bats chose you because your heart still remembers silence, the space where stories breathe. Clara's throat tightened. But Thomas said, "Those who read never leave." The librarian's expression grew tender, tinged with sadness. Some stories must be carried forward. Others must be set free. She turned toward the shelves, trailing her hand across the jars as she passed. Each one glowed brighter at her touch. These are not books. They are lives. Fragments of dreams that sought meaning in the rain. Every time someone listens, the jar warms again. Every time they forget. Her voice faded as she gestured toward a dark corner of the room where several jars no longer glowed, their glass dull and lifeless. The story fades into nothing. Clara felt her pulse slow, as though matching the quiet rhythm of the chamber. The sound of the rain outside was fading too, becoming more distant, like memory itself. "What happens if I take one?" she asked. The librarian looked at her, a faint smile flickering at the corners of her mouth. "Then you promised to remember it." Clara hesitated, her gaze moving from one glowing jar to another. Each one pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Finally, she reached for one that shimmered faintly blue, the color of twilight just before the rain begins. The moment her fingers touched it, warmth flooded her hand, and the faint hum of countless whispers filled the air. She saw flashes, not of her own life, but of Otir's, a scholar writing, alone by candlelight, a mother humming by a window, a young man walking through fog with a lantern, whispering a prayer to the bats that guarded the old library, all their stories interlaced, merging into one soft chorus. The librarian's voice echoed, softer now. "Do you see, Clara? Even rain remembers. Even silence holds a voice." Clara nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then I'll remember." The woman's expression warmed, though her figure was fading, her light dimming like a candle reaching its end. "Then my work is done." The jars began to hum, their faint glow rising like stars against the darkness. The entire room seemed to breathe, expanding with quiet life. 1,000 tiny lights drifted upward, forming patterns that resembled wings, the same delicate arcs as the bats of Coimbra. As the lights ascended, they passed through the ceiling and vanished, leaving only the faint echo of rain. Clara blinked, and the chamber was gone. She was standing once again inside the old library, her lantern still in hand, the rain outside steady but no longer cold. The shelves were empty now, yet the air was alive with warmth, as if the stories had moved somewhere. She could no longer see, but could still feel. She stepped outside into the rain, letting it wash over her face. For the first time, it felt like a blessing, each drop carrying a memory, a voice, a whisper. Somewhere high above, the bats circled the spire of the old library, their wings glimmering faintly against the stormy sky. Clara looked up and smiled. Behind her, the great wooden doors creaked shut with a sound that was almost like a sigh. On their surface, for the briefest moment, woods appeared, glowing faintly before fading into the grain of the wood. Every story is a doorway, every listener. "Ah, keeper," she whispered into the wind. "Good night, Coimbra, Coimbra." And the rain answered with silence, soft, eternal, and kind. Asterisk years passed, and the city of Coimbra, aged gently beneath the same whispering rain that had watched over it for centuries. The river still curled around the town like a silver ribbon, reflecting the lanterns that flickered on balconies each dusk. Time moved softly here, as if afraid to disturb the stories resting beneath the cobblestones. And on one such rainy evening, quiet, fragrant, with wet jasmine and smoke from nearby chimneys, Clara returned. She was older now, her steps slower, her hair touched by streaks of silver that gleamed beneath the lantern light. But her eyes still carried the same gentle curiosity that once guided her into the old library. She had come back not as a scholar or wanderer, but as someone seeking to remember what memory itself had begun to erase. The street leading to the library had changed. A new cafe stood where an apothecary once had been. The iron fountain still murmured softly in the square, though moss covered its base, and pigeons now gathered where children used to play. Yet the rain was exactly the same. It fell with that same rhythm she remembered from her dreams, the same gentle pulse that had once led her through the corridors of whispers. As she approached the hill, she felt her heart tremble. The great oak doors of the library loomed ahead, their carvings faded by time but still breathing faint traces of life. She paused, tracing her fingers along the wood where, years ago, she had seen words appear and fade. Now, the surface was only damp and cold, yet she could almost hear the faint echo of that long-ago whisper. Every listener, a keeper. A shiver ran through her. The rain thickened, drumming softly against her umbrella. She hesitated, then pushed the door open. It creaked, a familiar sound that sent ripples of warmth and sorrow through her chest. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust, rain, and something faintly metallic, the scent of old ink perhaps, or time itself. Most of the shelves were bare now. They were darkened with age. The chandeliers hung low, their glass prisms catching the occasional flicker of lightning from outside. And there, in the corner near the great spiral staircase, rested the desk she once sat, at the place where the lantern had burned and Thomas had warned her of the book that remembered names. Clara exhaled slowly. She walked to the desk, her fingertips brushing over its surface. A fine layer of dust coated it, but beneath that she could still see faint carvings, initials, dates, notes from scholars long gone. She felt a strange warmth rise in her chest, and then she heard it, the faintest flutter, like the turning of a distant page. At first, she thought it was just the wind slipping through the cracks, but the sound grew clearer, steadier, with a heartbeat beneath the rain. She froze, her breath shallow. "Thomas? Thomas? Thomas?" she whispered. The word vanished into the dark, swallowed by silence. Then, from above, came a flicker of movement, a shadow gliding across the beams, silent as breath. She lifted her gaze. There they were, the bats of Coimbra. They hung in gentle clusters along their rafters, their wings wrapped around themselves like folded letters. As lightning flared outside, she caught the gleam of their tiny eyes, reflections of candlelight, calm and knowing. The sound of wings brushed the air. One bat detached itself from the rafters and began to circle slowly above her, its movements smooth, deliberate. Clara held her breath as it descended, hovering near her shoulder before settling on the open edge of the desk. Its wings glistened faintly, as though brushed by raindrops, and its body pulsed with a soft, internal glow, the color of ink under moonlight. She smiled faintly. "I wondered if you'd still be here." The bat tilted its head, and a familiar warmth filled the space. Not a voice this time, but a thought, soft and resonant. "You came by." Clara closed her eyes, the sound of rain wrapping her like a blanket. "I had to," she whispered. "I dreamed of the stories too long." Pause. Then the thought came again, gentler now. "The library dreams of you." Her breath caught. The room darkened. Not from the storm, but from within, as if the shadows themselves were listening. The shelves began to hum faintly, a vibration low and deep, like the sound of distant thunder. Lights bloomed from the cracks between the floorboards, silver streams that wove themselves upward, tracing the air with familiar symbols. Clara watched in awe as the room began to transform. The walls expanded subtly, stretching beyond their physical bounds, revealing glimpses of another space. Vast, glowing, infinite. She saw the faint outline of the archive once more, shelves of jars glowing in the distance, voices humming in soft unison. And at the center, for just a breath, she saw the librarian, smiling gently, her form flickering like candlelight reflected on water. "Why did you call me back?" Clara whispered. The bat lifted its wings, and the hum deepened. The air seemed to answer her. Because stories do not end when they are forgotten. They wait. Clara nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "Then let's begin again." Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, but within the library there was only peace. The peace of rain against stone, of memory against silence. The bats settled once more in the rafters, and the glow of their wings faded into the rhythm of night. Clara sat at the old desk, opened her journal, and began to write, and somewhere deep within the Library of Coimbra, a heartbeat answered. The rain outside had softened to a whisper, the kind of steady rhythm that feels like breathing. Inside the library, time itself seemed to slow. The flickering lantern light cast soft halos across the walls, and the faint hum of the bats above folded gently into the silence. Clara sat at the desk, her fingertips resting on the old journal she had just opened. The pages were damp. At the edges, the ink faded, yet the handwriting was oddly familiar. Not in style, but in spirit. The first words shimmered faintly under the candlelight. "The Last Listener." She traced the title with her hand, her pulse quickening. The script curved gracefully, as if written by someone who loved what they feared to lose. Beneath it was a line that made her breath catch for Clara, who will remember what we forgot. She froze. The candle flickered, and for a moment she thought she'd misread it. But no, the name was hers. The dedication, written in a trembling hand, was clear as the rain that traced down the glass. "How?" she began softly, her voice trembling in the stillness. "Who wrote this?" No answer came, only the distant creak of the shelves settling under the weight of forgotten centuries. She turned the page, and the ink seemed to shift subtly, like it was breathing. Each line appeared as she read it, sentences unraveling, as though the story was writing itself in real time. Once, in a city that forgot how to listen, there lived a keeper of silence. She walked among words that had grown weary of being heard, and in her heart she carried the last echo of a promise that every story deserves to return home. Clara's eyes blurred. The words reached something deep in her, something older than her memories. She flipped another page. When she was a child, she stood in the rain and heard the voices of wings. They told her that ink was a form of memory, and that some pages could breathe, but she forgot, as all listeners do, until the night she returned to the place where stories slept beneath dust and time. Her fingers trembled. The rain against the windows grew heavier, like a heartbeat speeding up. She looked around the shelves, the spiral staircase, the faint glow between the floorboards, and it felt as if the library itself was aware of her reading. Then she heard it again. That soft flutter of wings. One of the bats detached from the rafters and landed on the desk beside her. It wasn't the same one as before. This one was smaller, with a faint tear along one wing that shimmered like silver thread. It blinked once, then twice, before lowering its tiny head toward the journal. Clara leaned closer. "Do you know who wrote this?" "This is the red." The candle flickered violently, and she heard not a voice, but a feeling, like a whisper forming behind her ribs. It was never written. It was remembered. Her eyes widened. "Remembered," she echoed. "Dot?" "Yes," the voice drifted. "Every listener becomes a story. Every story becomes a listener." As the words sank in, a low hum filled the room again, vibrating through the floor and the desk. The ink on the pages began to ripple, lines twisting and rearranging. She watched in awe as her own name appeared again. Clara Esteban, the last listener, written in the same hand that had penned the first line. She felt a surge of warmth beneath her palm, as though the journal recognized her touch. The pages turned on their own, fluttering rapidly until they stopped on one filled with unfamiliar symbols, circular, intricate, and softly glowing. It looked almost like a map, but not of any place she knew. The rain outside slowed to a hush, as if the entire city were holding its breath. The bat spread its torn wing and pressed it gently against the page. The ink shifted again, forming an image, the outline of a key, floating briefly before fading into the parchment. Clara stared at it, realization dawning. "The key of names," she whispered, recalling Tomas's voice from long ago. It was real. A sound echoed through the hall, faint footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the upper level. She turned sharply, heart racing. The spiral staircase creaked. A shadow moved just beyond the candlelight, pausing at the landing. "Who's there?" she called out softly. The figure didn't move closer, but she could feel its presence. Calm, patient, ancient. Then came a voice, low and melodic, yet familiar in a way that made her chest ache. "You opened the book," it said. "Then the stories have chosen you again." The words echoed softly through the chamber, and for a moment she thought she saw her, the librarian, standing in the half-light, her gown shimmering like mist caught between worlds. "What do they want from me?" Clara asked, barely above a whisper. "To listen," the librarian said, "to remember until the rain stops. And just like that, the light dimmed and the figure dissolved into the hum of the library. The bats stirred above, restless now, their wings brushing against the air like sighs. Clara looked down at the journal. The words now fading, replaced by a single new line glowing faintly at the bottom of the page. The story begins again when the rain forgets to fall. The candle flickered once more. Tin went out in the darkness. Clara could still feel the heartbeat of the library, steady, patient, waiting. She closed the book gently and whispered into the quiet, "I'll remember," outside. The rain began again. Asterisk, the rain had become softer again, almost a lullaby now, its rhythm against the stained glass windows a gentle, hypnotic pulse. The great library breathed in silence, an ancient, steady exhale of dust, candle smoke, and memory. Clara stood beside the desk, the closed journal still warm under her palm. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its leather cover, as though the rainlight itself had begun to remember her face. She knew she couldn't leave now. Something inside the building beneath it perhaps was waiting. The words of the librarian lingered in her mind like the echo of a dream. To listen, to remember until the rain stops. Slowly, she lifted the lantern and began walking through the labyrinth of shelves. The air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of damp stone and forgotten ink. Between the aisles, she glimpsed movement, shadows that didn't quite match her own, and the flutter of small wings above. The bats followed her silently, their presence no longer frightening but almost comforting, as if guiding her. At the end of the main corridor, she found a door she had never noticed before. It was old, its surface carved with strange markings, the same symbols she had seen on the glowing map within the journal. The wood was blackened with age, and there was no handle, only a faint outline of a keyhole. The key of names. She murmured again, as if in answer the air around her thickened. The bats circled once above her, their soft cries like whispers of memory, before vanishing into the rafters. Clara took a deep breath, then placed her hand against the cold surface of the door. The moment her skin touched the wood, she felt it a pull, a heartbeat, slow and deep, like the rhythm of something sleeping on the other side. The carvings glowed faintly, their lines threading together until the shape of a key shimmered into existence, forming out of light and air. Without thinking, she reached forward and grasped it. It felt real, solid, yet warm. And as she held it, she heard the faint murmur of voices beneath the floor. "Listen," they said. "We remember you." Her breath hitched. The voices weren't the frightening. They were sorrowful, almost tender. Slowly, she turned the key. The door unlocked with a low, resonant sound that seemed to ripple through the entire library. Lantern light flickered. The ground trembled faintly beneath her feet. As the door swung open, a stairwell descended into shadow, spiraling downward into the depths of the earth. Clara hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked stone and old paper. She moved carefully, the flame of her lantern casting a soft golden circle around her. Along the walls were shelves, hundreds of them, filled not with books, but with small glass jars. Each one contained a folded slip of parchment, glowing faintly like trapped starlight. She paused, mesmerized. "What are these?" she whispered. A voice answered her from nowhere and everywhere at once, the same voice that had spoken through the librarian. "Pia, they are names. Every name that was spoken and forgotten. Every story that was never told to the end." Clara's heart ached. The glow from the jars flickered as though the stories inside could hear her presence. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers along the glass. Some of the slips trembled, faintly unfolding before curling back again. Like sighs, she found one jar that pulsed brighter than the others. The name inside it was half faded, but she could still read it. E. Blackwood. Her eyes widened. "Evelyn?" she whispered. The air stilled. Then, softly, the sound of distant rain returned, though there were no windows, no openings for it to enter. It was as if the world above was bleeding through the walls, trying to remind her that time still existed. "Evelyn Blackwood," Clara repeated. "The voice that tells these stories." A faint warmth brushed her cheek, not air, but the echo of a smile. She was the first listener, the voice said, before the rain, before the silence. Clara's pulse quickened. Then what happened to her? She stayed when others left. She listened until the stories took her name. Her lantern flickered, the light dimmed, shadows lengthening across the stairwell. From somewhere behind her, the faint rustle of wings stirred again. The bats had followed her down. They circled once, then perched along the shelves, their tiny bodies glowing faintly with the same light as the jars. And then she understood. The bats were the keepers, the carriers of the stories too fragile to remain written. She turned slowly, her breath shallow. "You've all been guarding them," she said softly, waiting for someone to listen. The smallest bat, the one with the torn wing, fluttered down and rested on her shoulder. Its eyes gleamed like drops of ink. "You've found your key," the voice murmured through the dark. "Now you must choose which name to wake." Clara looked at the endless shelves, each jar glowing, each name a forgotten life waiting to be remembered. Her gaze returned to the one that held E. Blackwood. She hesitated. Her heart pounded in her chest. If she opened it, would she free Evelyn? Or become her? The lantern flickered once, then twice, as though urging her to decide. The air shimmered. The scent of rain deepened, and the hum of the library above began to echo down through the stone, like the heartbeat of something vast and alive. Clara lifted the jar carefully, holding it close to her chest. The light inside pulsed softly, in rhythm with her breath. And as the thunder rolled distantly beyond the world of walls and rain, she whispered the name aloud. "Evelyn Blackwood." The light bloomed, and the rain above stopped. Asterisk, when Clara spoke the name, the sound did not fade into silence. It bloomed, rippling through the stairwell like light beneath water. The jar trembled softly in her hands, and for an instant she thought she heard laughter, not of joy, but of relief, the kind that comes after centuries of waiting. The glow within the glass flared, casting delicate shadows that danced across her face and the stone walls, like forgotten memories coming alive again. Then, with a sound as gentle as a sigh, the jar cracked. A thin stream of light rose from it, swirling upward like breath, curling around her fingers and the flame of her lantern before dissolving into the air. Clara gasped softly, not from fear, but from awe. She could feel it, the presence of something vast, something human and not human, awakening inside the quiet rainlight. The name she had spoken, Evelyn Blackwood, was no longer just a whisper from the past. It was here. "Evelyn," Clara said softly, her voice trembling. Are you real?" The reply came not as words, but as a soft hum that seemed to flow directly into her thoughts. "I have always been here, beneath the rain, within the ink of every story whispered to the dark." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. The presence was calm, patient, as though watching her not with eyes, but with memory. She turned slowly in the lantern's glow, and to her astonishment, the library around her began to shift. The walls expanded like breath, and where there had been shelves of glass jars, now stood tall wooden cases filled with books bound in mist and gold. Bats flew above her in graceful circles, their wings scattering trails of luminous dust that fell like soft rain. Each time one passed close to her, she could hear faint murmurs, voices from countless stories, soothing, familiar, like the rhythm of a lullaby. "Is this your story?" she asked. "It was," came the reply, "until the rain began. Then it became everyone's." The book's pages began to turn on their own, whispering softly, each one glowing with scenes she couldn't fully grasp, fragments of moonlit towers, candlelit desks, shadows moving across parchment. Clara felt something inside her heart open, as though she was not simply reading but remembering. She reached out, letting her fingertips brush the paper. It was warm, alive, and when she did, a voice, Evelyn's voice, began to speak through her. Once, there was a girl who listened to stories until she became one. The lantern flickered, and the rain above deepened. Clara's breath came slow and even now, as if she were falling into a dream she had always known was waiting. She realized then that the library was not haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by stories, by echoes of every voice that had ever whispered into the night, by every listener who had once found comfort in the rain. The bats, the jars, the murmurs, they were not spirits trapped, but stories kept safe until someone cared enough to listen again. Clara smiled faintly. "And now," she whispered, "what happens when someone listens again?" The presence around her shimmered, tender and infinite. "Then the rain learns your name." She closed her eyes. The glow from the book wrapped around her, its light soft and golden, drifting upward like fog. The bats circled once more, their wings silent and shining. One by one, the shelves dissolved into darkness, until there was nothing left but the sound of rain and Evelyn's voice, now distant, now near, as if she were speaking from every drop. "Sleep now, Clara," it said. "The story will keep you safe." Clara exhaled slowly. The lantern's flame dimmed, and as her breathing matched the rhythm of the rain, her reflection in the mirrored floor closed its eyes too, fading gently into the glow. Outside, dawn began to break over Coimbra, soft and silver, The bells in the distance tolled once, slow, tender, like the closing of a page, and high above the library tower, the bats began to fly again, not into the darkness, but into the morning light. Asterisk, when Clara awoke, she could not tell if she was still inside the library or within a dream spun from its shadows. The air was cool and soft with rainlight, and the scent of old books mixed gently with that of wet stone. Around her, the silence was alive, breathing. The great hall of the library shimmered faintly, as if existing between two worlds, one of memory, one of mist. Her hand still rested on the open book upon the table, but its pages no longer glowed. Instead, faint ripples of silver traced beneath her fingers, like the last heartbeat of a story. She whispered softly, "Evelyn." Her voice was smaller now, swallowed by the rain outside, yet it carried far within the space, echoing back to her in strange, melodic tones. Then, faintly, the book began to hum again, not with words, the time, but with something deeper, something that felt like the sound of her own heartbeat whispered through centuries of quiet. A phrase began to form across the page, written not in ink, but in light. She dreamed she was the echo of a story that had not yet been told. Clara's breath caught. "That's me," she murmured. "You're writing me." "Not I," came Evelyn's voice, softer now, threaded with rain. "You are writing yourself. Every step you took, every breath beneath a storm, every Castian they've become, the ink." Clara closed her eyes, and in the silence that followed, she could feel the truth of it. She had come seeking mystery, answers, and perhaps comfort from the storm. Yet she had found something else entirely. Herself, folded into the whispering walls of time. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed the bats silent, graceful, circling above her once more. But this time they did not seem like guardians or watchers. They seemed like thoughts, fragments of her own memory, flying free. The light from the book grew dimmer, fading into the same gentle glow that filled the air. Clara looked toward the window, and through the rain-streaked glass she saw the city of Coimbra beneath a soft dawn mist. The river gleamed faintly. The streets, empty and shimmering, seemed to belong to a forgotten dream. And yet there was peace. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of rain and parchment. "Evelyn," she whispered again, "will I remember this when I leave?" "Memory is never truly gone," the voice replied. "It lingers in what you choose to listen to. The sound of rain, the smell of old paper, the hush between heartbeats, they will remind you." Clara smiled faintly. "So this isn't goodbye. No story ever truly ends," said Evelyn. "It simply waits to be read again." Clara ran her hand along the edge of the book, tracing the faint ridges of its cover. She felt warmth pulse beneath her skin, a steady, gentle rhythm, like the heartbeat of the library itself. For a long time, she simply listened to the rain tapping on the glass, to the faint flutter of wings above, to her own breathing falling into sync with the rhythm of the night. She felt calm now, deeply so, as though her heart had learned to beat in harmony with the library's ancient pulse. Then, slowly, she stood. The book's light faded completely, yet its warmth lingered in her palm. She turned toward the great doors of the hall, doors she had once feared to open, and this time they swung silently outward, revealing the staircase that spiraled back down to the world below. As she descended, the sound of the rain grew louder, closer. Each step carried her from one realm into another, and though she could not tell where the boundary lay, she knew she was crossing it. The final step brought her to the threshold of the library's entrance. She looked back only once, and there, high above, she saw the bats circle once more, their wings painting faint trails of light in the air. Then they disappeared into the mist. Clara stepped outside. The rain greeted her softly, cool against her skin. The streets of Coimbra shimmered like threads of silver weaving through stone, and the bells in the distance began to toll. She lifted her face toward the sky, letting the raindrops wash over her, not cold, not harsh, but tender, as though each drop carried a whisper from the story she had left behind. She began to walk. The cobblestones beneath her feet glistened, and for a moment she thought she saw faint reflections following her, not shadows, but shapes of light echoing her movements. The air around her hummed quietly, and in that hum she heard the familiar voice again. "You are never alone beneath the rain." Clara smiled, her eyes closing briefly as she whispered, No. She could feel the warmth of the book still within her chest, not as words, but as calm, as stillness, as understanding. Each heartbeat became a quiet turning of a page. The rain fell steady and endless, washing the city in silver light. Somewhere high above, the library waited, its windows glowing faintly in the dawn. The bats would return at dusk, and perhaps, when the next storm came, someone else would find their way there. Someone ready to listen. But for now, there was only peace. The rain, the breath, the quiet sound of footsteps fading into morning. Months passed before Clara returned to Coimbra. The city had shifted in the subtle way that old places do not in shape, but in feeling. The air carried a slower rhythm. The river moved with a deeper voice, and every corner seemed to breathe the echo of rain. It was early autumn again, and the first storm of the season had begun to fall, soft and deliberate, as if the sky were remembering something tender. Clara walked the narrow street, wrapped in her grey coat, the hem brushing against puddles that reflected the lantern light like pools of melted gold. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the strange anticipation that always came before meeting an old memory. The great library awaited her at the crest of the hill, still grim, still solemn, its windows flickering faintly with the same warm glow that once called her inside. When she pushed open the ancient doors, the same scent of rain-soaked parchment welcomed her. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. The silence was deeper now, richer, as though it had been waiting. Clara moved slowly through the aisles, her fingers tracing the edges of shelves where the dust seemed to hum with life. The table where she had once sat stood untouched, a single candle flickering at its center, and there, resting atop the wooden surface, was the book, the same one, or perhaps its reflection in another time. Its cover was unmarked, blank, waiting. She sat down. The rain outside intensified, a steady rhythm against the high windows. and she felt the weight of quiet settle around her like a familiar embrace. When she opened the book, the pages were empty. Not one line of ink, not one glimmer of light, only blank paper. Soft beneath her fingertips, she smiled faintly. "I suppose this is how every story begins?" she whispered. Then, as her breath brushed the page, faint letters began to emerge, slow, graceful, like water seeping into silk. The words were written in a hand she now knew too well. "Dear Clara, if you are reading this, then you have remembered the sound of the rain. That means the story is still alive." Her heart tightened, and she leaned closer, watching as more words appeared. Stories do not end when the pages close. They rest like embers beneath ash, waiting for breath, for memory, for a whisper to awaken them again. You found your way here once because you were listening. If you listen still, you will hear us in the turning of leaves, in the wings of the bats, in the pulse of your own quiet heart. The candle flickered, and the faint sound of wings stirred high above. Clara looked up. Through the half-light, she saw them, the bats of Coimbra, gliding silently through the arches, their motion like threads, weaving dusk and dawn together. They circled, once, twice, before disappearing into the beams of the ceiling, leaving only soft ripples of shadow dot. She turned back to the book. More words formed. "You asked once if you would remember. You have. That is enough. But this memory is not meant to bind you to what has been. It is meant to carry you gently forward. The rain that falls upon this city tonight is not the same as the one you once stood beneath, yet both belong to the same sky." Clara closed her eyes, letting those words settle within her. Outside, thunder murmured distantly, rolling like a slow breath over the hills. She felt the warmth of tears mixing with the scent of rain. Not sadness, not joy, something quieter, something whole. When she opened her eyes again, the book had changed. Its pages were no longer blank, but filled with faint sketches, scenes from her memory. The staircase of marble, the whispering lamps, the mirror of puddles outside the window. And, at the center of it all, a small, luminous outline of herself standing in the rain. She turned to the final page. There was one last line, simple and soft. "The story continues whenever you return." For a long moment, Clara simply sat in the silence, listening to the heartbeat of the library, steady and alive. Then she closed the book gently and rose. As she walked toward the doors, she could feel the rhythm of the rain aligning with her steps. One heartbeat for every drop, one breath for every echo. When she reached the entrance, she paused and looked back one final time. The candle still burned, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw a figure there, faint, translucent, a woman in grey, smiling. Evelyn, or perhaps only the memory of her voice. The image shimmered, then dissolved into the soft golden haze of the candlelight. Clara stepped outside. The city below was veiled in rain and light, each droplet glinting like a word falling from an unseen page. The bells of Coimbra began to ring low, patient, eternal. She lifted her face to the sky, feeling each drop as both farewell and beginning. The rain became her lullaby, the streets her story. And somewhere within that infinite quiet, she could still hear the voice. Sleep now, gentle listener. You are home beneath the rain.